blind, which I will get to later on. We also know that CRT, it actually trades objective truth and it focuses on subjective feelings, especially if you fall into a specific oppressed group. Then they believe that you have experiential knowledge that says, as long as a minority says that racism is present, you have to agree with that. And if you don't agree with that, you have white fragility. And we'll talk about that in a moment. CRT also requires acceptance and liberation of all oppressed groups. This is really important. A lot of people say, yeah, but what if I agree with critical race theory, but I don't agree with a concept called intersectionality? Nope, for you to be critical race theorist, for you to agree with CRT, you also have to have a desire to liberate what they refer to as all oppressed groups, which we will get into. Who is the oppressed group that they're referring to? Now, do you all remember when Martin Luther King said this? I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Do we agree with that? Okay, now, if my friends, if we're all created equal, then why are we putting people into categories of oppressed and the oppressor? If we're created equal, then that means that God sees us as equal. You see, we do see there's biblical principles that we clearly see that man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at what? See, look at you, bright students, yes. He looks at the heart. But I also want to define an accurate definition of racism, because you'll hear what I refer to as linguistic theft, where they take terms and they infuse their own definitions into it. But racism, a very clear and simple definition, is the belief that one race is inherently superior or inferior to another. The idea that skin color determines your importance and value. But I want to go back to that top one. If racism is the belief that some individuals are superior or inferior, then by its nature, by default, CRT, critical race theory, in and of itself is a racist ideology, because it says that some people are inferior based upon their skin color. And they're attributing entire characteristics to that. In fact, they believe that minority individuals are permanent victims, and they believe that those who are white, especially if they're white males, especially you white men, you've got problems, right? That somehow you are permanently the problem. So let's take a look at some of these tenets in more detail. That racism is permanent and that it's always present. Again, this ideology that somehow all whites are racist. According to Barbara Applebaum, what she says that all white people are racist or complicit by virtue of benefiting from privileges or white privilege that are not something they can voluntarily renounce. When you look at Robin DiAngelo, who is the very well-known author of the book called White Fragility, here's what she says. White people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview because it's the bedrock of our society and its institutions. Now look at this part. Entering the conversation with this understanding is free because it allows us to focus on how rather than if our racism is manifest. You see what she's saying? She's saying that somehow, as long as you embrace that idea, it allows you to see when racism is present, not if. You know, and I believe that we should be asking, like, for example, remember what happened with George Floyd? And really, anytime there is a police shooting, what is the automatic assumption if the two individuals have different colored skin? Especially if the officer is white, and the gentleman that was black, if he's black and the officer is white, what is generally the media narrative? What is it?
Racism.
Now, do they offer proof?
No.
Do they give evidence?
No.
And I believe it's incumbent upon us to actually say, well, wait a minute, before I change my Facebook profile. Because you know people like to do that. They're like, oh, I stand with you, blah, blah, blah. Before we do all of that, I think we have a moral obligation to pursue the facts. I was a journalism student in school, and I remember at the university, Professor Ross would always say, oh, no, you guys, you have to make sure that you pursue the facts, not your narrative. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel that the media does a very good job of that. No. They're like, no. They want to jump on a narrative and they run with it, but sometimes we, the people, are complicit because we just buy right into it rather than saying, well, wait a minute, can we take a step back? And even sometimes challenging people to say, you know what, I'm actually not going to post something on Facebook or whatever social media platform. Sometimes people feel pressure to put things that, nope, I refuse to until I have looked at all the facts. Or maybe it is, you know what, I'm going to pray. Maybe you're posting, I'm going to pray about this, and ladies and gentlemen, let me remind us to pursue facts over emotion and conjecture. You know, because I think that if we don't, we are part of the problem because we are buying into sometimes the lies. Now, let us remind each other too. Sometimes there are situations where yes, color perhaps was the motivation, but I do not believe that that is the majority of the time. That's why rather than looking at a group of individuals or labeling the police as bad people, what we need to do is pursue what's called a case-by-case basis where we do our due diligence to pursue the facts, not a narrative. Can we do that? Is that fair?
Yes.
Now, let's continue. So, this is Robin DiAngelo with her book, White Fragility. Now look at what she says. This is just one of my personal favorites. She says a positive white identity is an impossible goal. White identity is inherently racist. White people do not exist out the system or outside of a framework of white supremacy. And here's where it gets really good. She says, I strive to be less white. To be less white is to be less racially oppressive. I can build a wide range of authentic and sustained relationships across race and accept that I have racist patterns. Now, I want us to do something, and I want you to be very serious about this. For the next 5 seconds, I want you to go on and close your eyes, please. Okay? For the next 5 seconds, I want you to seriously try and be less white or whatever color you are. Okay, just kidding. Okay, obviously, some of you are like, okay, I got my eyes closed, but no, I'm joking. But what does she mean by that? I try to be less white. I strive to be less white. The first time I read this, I just kept reading it over. I'm like, what does she do? Go to the tanning booth or something? Like, how is she less white? What does that mean? That makes absolutely no sense. But yet, she sold millions of these books and people buying into this idea that somehow they can be less white. We actually have national leaders, even sometimes from the church, that are saying, I am divorcing myself from whiteness. I'm like, I don't know what you think you're going to do, but okay, when you look in the mirror, guess what? You're still going to be white. There you go. Surprise. But what does this really mean? But you see, I do believe that this is part of the problem. You see, that sounds great. It sounds very woke. And I believe a lot of people are pursuing wokeness than they are righteousness. They are committed to a narrative so that they can be cool amongst their friends and amongst their group, and they're so liberal and they're so progressive, but I believe that it's at the expense of truth. It's at the expense of really what it means to really love your neighbor. One of the New York Times best-selling books right now is So You Want to Talk About Race from Ijeoma Oluo, and she says if you are white in a white supremacist society, then you are racist. If you are male in a patriarchy, you are sexist. If you are able-bodied, then you are an ableist. If you're anything above poverty in a capitalist society, you are a classist. You can sometimes be all of these things at once. I know some of you are like, what? I know. It sounds a little crazy, but people are very committed to this ideology. And so therefore, it makes all these will see. But sadly, when you look at this list and you think about who's under attack in our nation today, I definitely believe that not only do we have an assault on truth, there also is an assault on gender, specifically sex. Specifically, if you identify as the heteronormative, there's an attack on that, there's an attack on marriage. There's also an attack, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, but sadly, I do believe that the white male is also under attack. Women as a whole, we're seen regardless of our color, but especially if you're a minority woman, you're also very much seen as a victim. Where's this ideology? It's all coming from critical theory and critical race theory. Now, does anybody recognize this gentleman? His name is Ibram X. Kendi. He is the author of a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. How many of you have heard that term, anti-racist? It's from this book. I mean, huge bestseller, national. Actually, he's a global speaker because people are buying into this, but look at what he says. When it comes to intersectionality, which is that concept of multiple groups where they intersect of essentially victimhood. But what's important though is to acknowledge that intersectionality requires us to dismiss a natural and even a biblical view of sex and gender as part of being anti-racist. He goes on to say, we must accept the premise that the other majority white-based isms and idioms such as racism, heteronormism, Christianity are the result of oppressor-based systems, and they must be dismantled simultaneously. That means the goal of CRT is to dismantle all of these power structures. All of these so-called privileged groups, the goal is to dismantle that. But look at what he says. To truly be anti-racist is to be feminist. To be truly feminist is to be anti-racist. And then, after Roe v. Wade was overturned and turned back to the states, he added, to be anti-racist is to be pro-what? Pro-choice. He says we cannot be anti-racist if we are homophobic or transphobic. To be queer anti-racist is to understand the privileges of my cisgender, of my masculinity, of my heterosexuality, and of their intersections, of how they all come together. I know. Yes, your facial expressions, yes. Like, what is going on? Yes. But again, why is this important? Because this is not just being taught in law schools, which has been the dominant narrative. This is just taught in law schools. It was back in 1980, 1984, when Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term critical race theory. It was at that time an analytical tool to see what are the remnants of racism in our laws today. But my friends, it's been quite some time since 1980. It is no longer only through the lens of let's look at laws and let's look at their long-term effect. Now it has become an ideology and a worldview. It's in the military. It's in schools as young as K through 12, as you will see, because I don't just show up and then say something. I always use their own words and use their examples so they can't say, well, you're just stacking the deck in your favor. Nuh-uh, Tinky Winky, no, I'm not. I use their own words against them. Now, raise your hand though if you kind of agree with this statement. How many of you have ever said at some point, I'm colorblind? Do you actually have any males that actually are colorblind? Because sometimes we do have that, and that's really accurate if they are. What about, you ever said, I see people not colored? Okay, what do you guys mean by that? When you say, I see people not colored, what do you mean by that? You what?
I see their heart.
You say their heart. Okay, anyone else? You judge them by their character. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Love.
Say that again?
Love.
Love. Yes, very good. Yes. And what about we're all the same? How do you agree with that? We're all the same. Okay, well, we're all the same. Who said we're all equal? Very good. Are we all equal?
Yes.
Well, should we be equal in God's eyes? We are. We know we are equal in God's eyes. Even our founding fathers acknowledge that we're created equal and we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are what? Life,
liberty,
and
pursuit of happiness.
but then it says government was instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, right? But here's the problem. Government is now complicit in this racism, or what some refer to as reverse racism, but really it's just discrimination or racism. It doesn't matter who it's coming from. You do not treat people differently based upon the color of their skin. Now, what some people have a problem with is when they say, oh, I'm colorblind. On one hand, I agree with the statement that, you know what, we are all the same in God's eyes, and we should treat each other the same. You should not treat someone differently simply based upon the color of their skin. But what some people say is, but that's very disingenuous, because you do see color. I mean, most people really know how to color coordinate their outfit, so we know that you see color. Everyone's looking really nice, you match. So from that perspective, we know that we see color. And so I think that if you're going to use that phrase, you need to be specific as to what you mean. That, you know what? I see color, but I'm not going to treat someone differently based upon that. I'm not going to discriminate on the basis of color. I'm going to get to know that person, love that person for who they are, not for the color of their skin. And so I love what you all were saying, because that is the correct interpretation of that term. But CRT advocates, they cannot stand that word color blindness. And so here's a really great article that they had trying to say how color blindness is actual racist. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. The first time I heard that, I really thought, people are taking it really way too far. But I want to draw your attention to education programs, because this is actually also what's being taught in schools. The Smithsonian's African American Museum actually has a whole section about white culture in the United States. And here's what they say. That white dominant culture, or whiteness, refers to the way white people and their traditions, attitudes, and even values have been normalized, and how they believe that it's negative toward other groups. For example, the family structure. They believe that white supremacy and whiteness is what's behind this idea that we should have a nuclear family of a father and a mother. Now, we know sociologists have been telling us for decades that children do best and they flourish when they are with their biological mother and father. But you see, critical race theorists, they don't believe that you need the nuclear family. They believe it can be 2 men and children, 2 women and children, no father in the picture. But we have to ask ourselves, who's losing out? What is at stake when we dissolve the nuclear family? You see, the nuclear family has been present in every single civilization. So it's not like you go to Asia or you go to Africa and you're like, oh, 2 men had a baby, look at that. No. In every civilization, you have a mother and a father. It's only in recent years, in the last decade really, that we've seen this whole push to dissolve the nuclear family. They also believe that science and the whole scientific method is also racist. This whole idea of objective, rational, linear thinking, which is scary that somehow they believe science is automatically racist or exudes whiteness. Even when it comes to things like being on time, okay? Time. I know, it's very, I'm like, that's kind of crazy that they actually think if you show up on time, that is a white value and it's being oppressive to other groups. Have you ever tried to show up 20 minutes late for a flight? Just saying. That doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that you can show up late for a flight and, oh, it's okay, they'll still be there. No. In the military, you don't get to show up late anywhere. That is not a white value, but sadly that's being attributed as whiteness. And even this idea of somehow white supremacy is behind all of this. Even when it comes to status and even working hard, they don't believe in meritocracy, that you earn things. They believe it should just be given. That's why they're all about equity. Even when it comes to faith and religion, they believe that Christianity is the white man's religion. Anything other than Judeo-Christian values, again, they believe is somehow oppressive to minorities. Even holidays, of course, Christmas, anything that is attributed to Judeo-Christian, they believe is oppressive and that they need to essentially overthrow this. But again, even at the very top, the Protestant work ethic of working hard, and that's the whole meritocracy, that you earn it. They don't believe that that is fair to minorities. And that's also where Black Lives Matter comes in. Remember the Black Lives Matter movement? Did anyone ever go to their website? When you went to their website, one of the things that was present was they wanted to, we foster a queer affirming network at this second paragraph, but I want to go up to the top. We are self-reflexive and do the work required, here it is, to dismantle the cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women. Then it goes down, we foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from a tight grip of heteronormative thinking. Friends, this also reeks of socialism and communism, and to be more specific, Marxism, which really had a problem with the family unit. They wanted to dismantle the family. And that is what is going on here. Even the heteronormativity. They have a problem with that. But my friends, when you think of this attack against the heterosexual family, even they themselves can't really bring any logic to that. Because out of the one thing that we all have in common, and think of how many people have walked the face of the planet since the beginning of time. I don't even think there's a number to express it. But what is the one thing they all have in common? Every single person, even these individuals, came from the union of sperm and egg, a male and a female. There's no getting around that. So this whole idea of getting rid of heteronormativity doesn't really make any sense at all, because they're not really walking in reality. Now, what about when it comes to school? CRT, people love to tell me CRT is not in our schools. I'm like, yes it is. Yes it is. They use euphemisms. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this as well. So what is a euphemism for CRT? Culturally responsive teaching. Or DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or sometimes some schools will say, we're focusing on social justice and activism training. I promise you they're not saying, let's be pro-life. Nope, it's everything else but that. Programs that focus on equity, inclusion, and even intersectionality. Now, I want some examples. CRT in curriculum. Cupertino, California, an elementary school there, forced their third graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities, then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. They're separated look at what age, 8-year-old children into oppressors and oppressed. Does anyone think we should be doing that with kids? No. Santa Clara County Office of Education, they denounced the United States as being a parasitic system based on the invasion of white male settlers and encouraged teachers to cash in on kids' inherent empathy to recruit them into political activism. The California Department of Education, they passed an ethnic studies curriculum that calls for the decolonization of American society, and it includes chants. Yeah, chants to who? To the Aztec god, yes, of human sacrifice. Portland public schools train children to become race-conscious revolutionaries by teaching that racism infects the very structures of our society and tells students to immerse themselves in revolution. That's that activism. That's the social justice and activism. What about, does CRT only impact the students? No, it also impacts teachers. Think about those that actually have to teach it. Springfield, Missouri. A middle school forced teachers to find themselves on an oppression matrix, claiming that white, heterosexual, Protestant males are inherently oppressors and must atone for their covert white supremacy. San Diego, California, their public schools accused white teachers of being colonizers and stolen Native American land and told them, "You are racist and you're upholding racist ideas, structures, and policies." They recommended that the teachers undergo anti-racist therapy. What about this one, Seattle, Washington? A school district told white teachers that they're guilty of spirit murder against black children and must bankrupt their privilege in acknowledgement of their thieved inheritance. But what about when it comes to parents? Students, teachers, CRT and parents. The Arizona Department of Education created an equity toolkit that claimed babies show the first signs of racism at 3 months old, and that white children become full racist, strongly biased in favor of whiteness by age 5. The principal of Eastside Community High School in New York sent white parents a tool for action which tells them they must become white traitors and then advocate for full white abolition. You see, this is not just, oh, this is just some lady standing up in the front of the room. No, these are examples that come from various states across the country, and it doesn't just impact the kids, it also impacts the teachers, and it also even impacts parents. Now, is CRT in Indiana schools?
Yes.
Hey, well, we're going to listen to this video. Let's see if it plays.
I'm the science coach and admin in the largest public school district in Indiana. I'm in dozens of classrooms a week, so I see exactly what we're teaching our students. When we tell you that schools aren't teaching critical race theory, that it's nowhere in our standards, that's misdirection. We don't have the quotes and theories as state standards per se. We do have critical race theory in how we teach. We tell our teachers to treat students differently based on color. We tell our students that every problem is a result of white men, and that everything Western civilization built is racist. Capitalism as a tool of white supremacy. Those are straight out of Kimberly Crenshaw's main points, verbatim in critical race theory, the writings that formed the movement. This is in math, history, science, English, the arts, and it's not slowing down. If students of color have lower reading scores, it's because of inequity. Therefore, we take from the white students and give to the colored students. That's Richard Delgado, straight out of CRT and Introduction. All teaching is political, with reality and facts taking the back seat. That's Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who outlined how she saw critical race theory flushed out in public schools in 1995. When schools tell you that we aren't teaching critical race theory, it means one thing. Go away and look into our affairs no further. It isn't about transparency, it isn't about cultural relevance, it's race essentialism, painted to look like the district cares about students of color. We call it anti-racism, so you feel bad if you disagree with our segregationist pedagogy. It's taking advantage of kids' vulnerability and parents' inactivity to preen over social snake oil schemes designed to create division. Parents, when we tell you critical race theory isn't taught in our schools, we're lying. Keep looking.
You see, sometimes people say to me, but I think that children should be taught the truth that America was and still is a very racist nation. When people say things like that, I always like to point out a couple of things. Black Americans in the United States right now are the richest blacks in the entire world. Really? If America is so racist, then why are we seeing so many blacks doing so well? Why does everyone want to come to America? Seriously, when's the last time you're like, oh man, I just really want to go to Mexico and Cuba? No, most people are not trying to do everything they can to go there, but everybody wants to come to America for a reason. America, this whole idea that it's still a racist nation, but I want you to consider Orlando Patterson. He's a liberal sociologist from Harvard University, and his goal was to actually support the idea that America is racist, and here's what he came with. He said, you know, America is now the least racist white majority society in the world. America has a better record of legal protections for minorities than any other society, white or black. America offers more opportunities to a greater number of blacks than any other society, including all those of Africa. That means America is a very good place for anyone, regardless of the color of their skin. But if America, this is what I like to point out to people, if America is really so racist, then how do you explain black wealth? Does anybody recognize any of these stars? Who is this? Who's this gymnast? Simone Biles? Does anyone know the basketball player? Okay, and who is the tennis player or the tennis players? Okay. How are they doing so well? Or what about when it comes to other industries? Anyone recognize this gentleman? Any of them?
Kanye.
Yes, so we have Jay-Z, Kanye, and then who's next to him?
Tyler.
Tyler Perry. Movie maker, movie producer, movie mogul. Okay? In fact, all billionaires. These are billionaires. We also see Hillel. Has Oprah done pretty well? Just saying. I think she has. Did you know there are more black billionaires in the United States than any other country by far? Not just black billionaires. There are so many millionaires that they can't even keep a track of how many millionaires there are. But if America is so racist, then why is there so much black success? In fact, even when you look at which ethnic minorities are doing the best, did you know those that immigrate from Nigeria are more likely to actually have 3 or more degrees? In fact, when you look at ethnic success by country, Nigerians are one of the richest black groups in America. How is that possible if America is so racist? Now, opponents of CRT, they don't want to talk about, well, here's what they claim. They don't want to talk about current and past racial injustices. America, in their minds, is still just as racist as it was in the Jim Crow era. My friends, here's what I'd like to point out. If America is no different than Jim Crow era, then why do we not have segregation the way we did then? And I like to remind people of specific situations that actually were very racist, where it truly was about the color of someone's skin. Does anybody remember the story of Emmett Till?
Yeah.
According to Time magazine, 100 most influential pictures of all time, it's the story of Emmett Till, which is told on PBS every single year. It's in most history books, if not every. The story of Emmett Till in 1955 he went to go visit family in Money, Mississippi. And the rumor was that he winked or whistled at a white woman, Miss Carolyn Bryant. She accused him of whistling at her or winking or flirting with her in the store. She told her husband, and this is Emmett here with his mom, Mamie Till. She sent him down to stay with his uncle down in Money, Mississippi. So, sadly, when Miss Bryant told her husband, and Mr. Bryant told his brother, his stepbrother, they actually kidnapped Emmett in the middle of the night. They dragged him out into the woods where they beat him, tortured him for hours. They beat him so badly, the coroner said his eye was actually hanging out of his body. They then shot him in the head, tied him to an industrial cotton gin, and they used barbed wire to tie him to that and threw him in the Tallahatchie River, where everyone knew Emmett had been lynched. That, my friends, is an actual lynching. What people like to refer to today as lynching is not the case. Now, in some situations it might be, but this is true lynching based upon the color of his skin. Days later, as they're looking for Emmett, finally, his body surfaces. And they said the stench was so horrible, and Emmett no longer looked like that. They actually had to close the coffin. They had to nail it shut. The coroner put a note on it that said, Mrs. Till, Miss Mamie Till, your beautiful baby boy no longer looks like that, but you must have a closed casket funeral because of what he looks like and the smell. They said you could actually smell his body an entire block away from the funeral home. Well, the news got out of what happened to Emmett Till. People came from all over the country to first look at Bryant's grocery store, the grocery store where he was accused of winking. And of course, that is Miss Carolyn Bryant. You see, about 10 years ago, she admitted that she actually made the whole thing up. She finally admitted that it was a lie, that Emmett never winked or whistled at her, that she lied. But when people came from all over to see the trial, but they also came to his funeral. And there is still a marker right outside of the Bryant grocery store that actually tells the story. Thousands of people showed up for his funeral. I mean, these thousands of people, along with different magazine publications, came from all over to see the funeral. And this is Miss Till, where they said you need to have a closed casket funeral. And she said, no, I want the world to see what hatred and racism and segregation did to my boy. You see, this is what actually galvanized the civil rights movement. It wasn't Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, in an interview, after she said, no, I won't sit in the back of the bus, that was in December of that same year, when they asked her, what gave you the courage? She said, I couldn't get that boy's body out of my mind. I couldn't get his mom out of my mind. You see, and I give you this wording so that you can look away. This is what Emmett looked like, but this is what he looked like when they found his body, and this is what his mom said, no, I want the world to see what they did to my boy. You see, it's time we opened the casket on segregation and racism, so this is what his body looked like. This is what changed people's hearts when they saw the truth for what it is. My friends, I also think we have to take the lid off on abortion as well and talk about abortion for what it is. We also have to talk about the racism that is inherent in critical race theory as well. And so there's lastly 4 ways that CRT advances abortion rights. Number 1, racism undergirds the pro-life position. They believe that racism is present in the pro-life position. In fact, they believe that pro-lifers are inherently racist. They believe that the pro-life position is rooted in white supremacy, that somehow it's trying to save white babies. But as you'll see, that's false. A, and you can remember it as race, R-A-C-E, very easy way to remember it. A is that they believe that any type of abortion restriction is also racist. They also believe that C, that we are to compel one another as well to simultaneously liberate all oppressed groups. That's that intersectionality. But as you'll see, they believe that the new oppressed group are pro-choice women. That's what we need to liberate. That's why we need abortion laws to be overturned. Any type of anti-abortion law, any pro-life law, they believe is oppressive to pro-choice women, which now they're saying is an oppressed group. The E is for equity over equality. See, they believe that black women need access to abortion to have the same outcome as white women, because equity is all about what? It's not about equality anymore. Now it's about equity, which is equality of outcome. So let's look at this first one real quickly. If you just Google, I literally took screenshots because there is no way that I could really convey all the different stories. The Supreme Court's Dobbs decision will hurt black women especially, okay? Abortion restrictions are white supremacy. Or what about on the other side? Abortion, the racists, most devastating weapon. We need racial solidarity to restore abortion rights. Everything now is in terms of race. And that's what they're using to try and advance this idea that pro-lifers are inherently racist and that they're seeing us as the oppressor. So if you're pro-life, according to them, you are oppressor to women and those who are not only pro-choice, but those who need abortion. Look at this headline. The racist history of abortion and midwifery bans. That's from the ACLU. What about this one? How the fight to ban abortion is rooted in the Great Replacement Theory. Again, now this is from a publication called 538. Guys, that's owned by ABC News. That means this isn't just being put out by just far left wing. No. This is ABC News, who actually is a supporter of this. When you look at, again, abortion acts as a racial justice issue. Why abortion restrictions disproportionately impact, and you continue, it's women of color. Everything is about minority women being victims. But look at this, pro-white life, okay, being pro-life or being pro-white life, the lesser known racist history of the so-called pro-life movement. They believe that conservatives use abortion as a wedge issue in a divisive political topics, essentially to advance the white population and white births. But I like to point to history. Friends, is it true that being pro-life is racist? Or is it the other way around? When you look at the history of abortion, who actually started Planned Parenthood? Who was the founder of the National Birth Control League?
Sanger.
Margaret Sanger. Was Margaret Sanger an avowed racist? Yes, in fact, the Planned Parenthood of Greater New York actually took down her statue acknowledging that she was an avowed racist and that really she was spurred on by eugenics. She even said colored people are like human weeds and need to be exterminated. We know that she actually got a lot of her education and training from Francis Galton, who was the cousin of Charles Darwin. But just for the sake of time, I want us to consider what is the #1 cause of death in America. It isn't police brutality. It isn't cancer. It's not HIV. It's not even gang violence. The #1 killer of blacks, my friends, is abortion. So if Black Lives Matter, then how come Black lives don't matter in the womb? Where is the BLM movement when it comes to the pro-life issue? Seriously, where are all these Black Lives Matter people when we're talking about abortion? Did you know that a black woman is 5 times more likely to abort her baby than any other ethnic group? Let's put it this way. Blacks only make up 13% of the United States population, my friends, only 13%. But when you break that number down, Black women are only 8% of the total population. Black men are only 5%. Now, if Black women are 8%, here it is, yet Black women have almost 40% of all abortions. If Black lives matter, then why are they silent when it comes to the killing of essentially the Black population? It's what some refer to as Black genocide. Even Jesse Jackson, decades ago, acknowledged that abortion is Black genocide for Black people because it literally, we're the only population that is not replacing itself. To replace itself, you need about 2.1%. We're all the way down to 1.8% and dropping. Those statistics actually go back more to about 2018. But we do know that looking at the census data, the Black population continues to decrease and decrease. Why? Because we're killing off our babies. You see, we don't hear the left coming against that. What about this? 4 ways CRT advances abortion rights? Well, we know that A is abortion restrictions. They believe any type of access should be allowed because if you block access to abortion, then that means that somehow you are racist. Again, we have all kinds of, if you Google it, it's there, but there's also data. They believe that, according to this, the risk of pregnancy complications to abortion, they believe that the effects of structural racism and oppression in healthcare that Black women and birthing people face, the risk of health complications from childbirth is, so they believe that it's safer for a woman to have an abortion than to actually deliver and have a baby. And it just continues, all these attacks against, excuse me, those who identify as pro-life. And look at this one. Even with Roe, abortion access has never been truly accessible to folks working to make ends meet. Restrictions on abortion coverage disproportionately harm Black women and birthing people and other people of color and must be eliminated in order for equitable abortion access to become a reality. So again, all this CRT language is rampant in this. The C is that for you to truly, this is why we have to reject this, because CRT believes that we're compelled to simultaneously liberate all oppressed groups. An example of this real quick is, remember when I had Ibram X. Kendi? Right after, June 24th, right after Roe v. Wade was overturned, he says to be truly anti-racist is to be feminist. To be feminist, anti-racist. To be anti-racist is to be pro-choice. To be pro-choice is to be anti-racist. We cannot be anti-racist if we're anti-abortion. Reversing Roe is racism and oppression on Black, pregnant, and birthing people. And you see, unless I'm quoting someone, I refuse to use ridiculous terminology such as birthing people or chest feeders. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to use appropriate terminology. It's women who have babies, not birthing people. Am I wrong? Okay. Yay. Shalom in the home. Okay. Reversing Roe, according to Ejolo Olulo, she says reversing Roe promotes racism and violence against Black bodies. Black birthers need access to abortion. She says, I'm tired of white people policing Black bodies and forcing white values on us. What is she saying? That to be pro-life is a white value. Friends, not wanting to kill another human being has nothing to do with the color of someone's skin. It has to do with moral values and principles. It's very simple. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. That has nothing to do with color. It has to do with simple common sense and acknowledging that God is the creator of life. And we don't throw away human beings because it's inconvenient. And last, we're going to look at some of these oppressed groups. Black and brown, women, LGBT+, disabled, poor, illegal immigrants, non-Christian religions. They believe that's all the oppressed. And who's the oppressor? Whites, males, heterosexuals, if you're able-bodied, middle class and wealthy citizens, Christianity. But now, who's the new oppressed? Especially since in the last 2 to 3 years, this is where now they're adding new oppressed groups. Who else? Trans women, they believe, are oppressed by who? Real women. If we say that I'm a real woman, that somehow that's oppressive to trans women. In fact, they're actually using transgenderism to advance abortion access, claiming that if you do not allow abortion access, you're discriminating against trans women. Okay, let's be honest. How many people are impregnating men that now identify as women? It's crazy to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Pro-choicers. They believe this is another oppressed group. If you're pro-choice, and who are the oppressed? The pro-choicers. And who's the oppressor? The pro-lifers. To be pro-life, are we really oppressing people? No, it's actually the other way around, because if anyone is oppressing someone, it's anyone who is trying to end the life of another human being. That, my friends, is true oppression. You see, we can't buy into this. And lastly, who else is the oppressed? Abortion-minded women and Planned Parenthood centers. In fact, Planned Parenthood actually had that on their website, that if you really want to be anti-racist, and if you really want to help liberate oppressed groups, that you will donate to their cause. And who do they believe are the oppressors? It's PCCs, right? It's right to life groups, pregnancy care centers. Is anyone that's pro-life? You see, we have to reject this ideology. And the last one is equity over equality. That Black women need abortion to have the same outcome as white women. Really? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 said that you're not supposed to discriminate against people on the basis of color. But to them, even Vice President Kamala Harris said that equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place, even if that does mean by discriminating against other people. But we have to ask, all these ethnic disparities that exist, is it because of racism, whiteness, and white supremacy? No. Are most disparities because of racism? Absolutely not. Or do sometimes lifestyle choices have to do with it? Children who grow up without a father, they're 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime. 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in prison. Even then, President Barack Obama admitted that. But if you look at the data, 1960, only 5% of America's children were born to unmarried parents. 1980, that number increased to 18%. The year 2000, it jumped to 33%. 2015, 41%. Look at 2020. That number is now 71.2% of Black children are born out of wedlock. Is that a white person's problem? Do they force that on Black people? No. You see, this whole idea of victimhood and claiming that the white person or the white individual is responsible for disparities is oftentimes a permanent victim mindset and the refusal to acknowledge personal accountability, responsibility, and your own choices. So, what then is the success? I believe, how do we change this? By pointing people to what's called the success sequence. The success sequence is a series of sequential life events, and if you do these in that order, you'll be successful. Number one, you graduate from high school first, at least, and possibly go on to, of course, attain other degrees. Second, you get a full-time job. Then you get married before having children. If you do things in that order, the success sequence tells you you will not live in poverty. And what does the data suggest? That when blacks follow that success rate, the success sequence, they have a 98% success rate. When Latinos follow the success sequence, 98% success rate of not living in poverty, and the same thing with whites. You see, the success sequence works. We have to remind people that the enemy to a lot of these populations, especially the black population in more of the inner city, is fatherlessness. It's not the white police officer. It's not white supremacy. It is the lack of fathers in the home and rampant promiscuity. You see, I know it's not convenient to say, but it doesn't mean it's any less the truth. And so I want to remind us, going back to the very beginning, when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the what? The content of their character. You see, that, my friends, is ultimately what we should be striving for. I do want you to take a picture of, this is my information. I did write, along with Summit Ministries, I did write this book right here. It's a CRT. It's a little ebook called The Big Ideas Behind Critical Race Theory. If you would like that sent to you, please feel free to send me an email right there and just put there in the subject line, please send ebook, and I'll be more than happy to send that to you. But I thank you so much for your time, and I hope that we will take the principles that we've learned, that we will reject what is false, reject what is divisive, and remember that we're the United States of America, not the divided States of America.